Hey guys! So years ago on my channel, I did a lot of videos about my struggles in music school, just my personal philosophy on classical music, things like that. I'll put them all up in the suggested videos if you haven't seen those. But I wanted to come back and talk a little bit more on some of these topics and get your guys' thoughts. I thought we could have a whole discussion about classical music culture here. It was kind of something interesting that sparked the idea for me to do this video. One of the things I've really gotten interested in the past couple of years is spiritual work, not with any particular religion, but more like spiritual awareness. I experienced a lot of loss in my life the last couple of years, and developing my own sort of spiritual faith and relationship really helped me get through those losses. And one of the things that I have done to support my spiritual growth is I sometimes attend webinars from various spiritual teachers. One of these teachers is Mark Nepo. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He's a poet, and so I really love that he has kind of an artistic, creative approach to spirituality. And I was attending one of his webinars that was about loss and grief, and he was talking about a number of different artists and telling certain stories they went through and how their grief and their loss actually served their art. One of the things he brought up in this webinar is Beethoven's Heiligenstadt Testament. Sorry for my German pronunciation. But it's basically the letter that Beethoven wrote when he left home. He was starting to lose his hearing, and he wrote this really distressed note to, I believe, his brother. He also sort of included his father in the letter, and it was about how he was losing his hearing and how difficult that was for him, and how he considered even possibly killing himself over his hearing loss. And this is a letter that is in the public domain, so you can Google it and read the translation yourself if you're intrigued. What really struck me about this is that I went to music school. I got a 4-year bachelor's in cello performance and a 2-year master's in early music performance. So I also did tons of summer festivals. I did so much music education in classical music. And I have never learned about this letter from Beethoven. I asked a couple colleagues and friends, do you know about this Beethoven letter? Nobody did. And I thought, how on earth do we have advanced degrees in classical music and we don't know this incredibly poignant, moving story about what Beethoven went through as a composer and as an artist? Basically, after he wrote that letter, he decided, despite his distress and misery, to keep at it. And then, of course, it was after Beethoven really started losing his hearing that he wrote some of the greatest works that we know him for. Some of his most famous repertoire was written after this point of darkness that he went through. So, of course, Mark Nepo, he was using this as an example in his webinar to show how loss and struggle and these types of things really can feed the creative process despite feeling so dark and so difficult at the time. And I was so touched by this, especially as someone who's been through, difficult things the past couple years, and I've often wondered, is my creativity going to come back? Is my spark going to come back? And so these types of examples are so poignant and so moving. And it's the exact kind of thing that is left out of classical music education. It's the exact reason why I got so frustrated with classical music, is that we're not learning the things that keep us inspired as artists, that show us that even the greatest composers of all time went through their periods of darkness. These are the types of things that fuel artists, that give us motivation to keep going, that help us get through the dark times and the more difficult struggles that we have along our musical journey. Knowing these things can empower us and inspire us. However, in classical music school, all we're taught about is execution and perfection and technical skills, and sure, we have music history, but it's all focused on exactly what's happening in the repertoire and how the repertoire is evolving. That's great stuff to know. I don't not want to know all the stuff that I learned in music school, but there's so much room to learn so much more that would actually make us more complete as artists. I've talked about this before, but I went to a lot of school. So many people, even the most talented musicians at my schools, not all of them are in music careers now that we're out of school. It's not for everybody, and no matter how good you are, how technically well you can execute your repertoire, doesn't mean you have everything and you are fully equipped to actually get into the real world and be a musician long term. But I think the reason it's so difficult for people to continue, despite wanting to go to music school and paying the tuition and doing the practicing, they still can't bring themselves to stay in the career after school, I think it's because we're lacking this more important, well-rounded knowledge of how musicians hundreds of years ago got through their rough patches. It's not an easy path. Already being an artist of any kind is difficult, and the people who are inclined to be artists tend to be more sensitive, just people who, getting through the world is maybe a little more complicated or more challenging, but then that makes them, great artists, great musicians. These people, and I'm one of them, we need this kind of support just as much as we need all the technical training. And in my experience in classical music school, that other side of our training is completely neglected. And I've talked about how classical music school neglects even practical career training. That's another video I'll probably do on the more practical side of all the things that are left out of the classical music curriculum in terms of actual skills and things that we need for the real world. But this is the more, artistic, inspirational, creative side that I think is extremely lacking. Now, I did go to school a couple years ago now. I was in college from 2006 to 2010, and then from 2010 to 2012 is when I did my master's. So there's some chance that music schools have gotten better and are maybe incorporating this stuff more since I was in school, which is why I definitely love to hear in the comment section if anyone has had similar experiences, or if they feel, that their school has done a good job providing them a more well-rounded musical education. I'm definitely curious to hear what you guys think about this. But for me, I was so touched and so inspired to hear this Beethoven story, and I desperately wish that I had learned it when I was in school. So thanks so much for watching. If you're new to my channel, be sure to subscribe. I have talking vlogs like this about being a classical musician, and then I've got tons of actual music performance videos as well as educational videos on Baroque style and historical performance. So go check out my channel if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.